This is my video about why Yu-Gi-Oh tutorials don't work. If you are a new or aspiring player looking to play Yu-Gi-Oh, the first thing that almost anyone would do for any game is look for a tutorial for how to actually play the game. And when you're looking for tutorials, YouTube almost always stands out as one of the highest quality sites to find a tutorial for any game you may want to play. So when I saw that one of my favorite channels, MBT Yu-Gi-Oh, had recently posted a video called How to Actually Play Yu-Gi-Oh, I thought it could be a great thing for the community to help introduce new players into the ways to play the modern card game of Yu-Gi-Oh. This was further reinforced when in the first few minutes of the Yu-Gi-Oh video, they stated this.
So today, I'm going to try to teach you both. What follows is an incredibly long and detailed primer on the idiosyncrasies of the card game, alongside an incredibly long and detailed love letter to the people, events, and mythologies that are just as important. My hope is by the end of this video, you'll not only be an expert at Yu-Gi-Oh, you'll be a fan.
A trusted community figure making a video focused on making a tutorial that'll have people understand the game of Yu-Gi-Oh in the modern year sounds incredible. There's only one real problem that I have with this video and videos of its ilk, and that it absolutely doesn't actually explain at all how to play modern Yu-Gi-Oh. Whilst the beginnings of this video do serve as a pretty good history documentary showing the fundamentals of how Yu-Gi-Oh was started and created with the original anime showing and the original versions of the game that you could play, such as on Duel Links or on Master Duel, it doesn't really go into any detail about how to actually play the modern game in 2025. It mostly goes through the basic fundamentals of how to start playing the game, how to do things like normal summon, special summon, and how the extra deck works, but it actually doesn't explain anything that any new player is going to need going into a first game of Yu-Gi-Oh they are going to play in paper or on Master Duel. A lot more of this video that is titled How to Play Yu-Gi-Oh ends up being focused on why to play Yu-Gi-Oh, not actually talking about the ways to play the game, but the reasons why you as a person should engage with Yu-Gi-Oh and play with it on some level. Meaning that this preamble that happens later on in the video is actually secondary to the initial question posed in the video.
How and why would anyone ever enjoy this?
Well, don't worry. I'll tell you.
Because the game is fun. That's most of what this video ends up saying about Yu-Gi-Oh as an actual game. It talks a lot about community, about coming together and playing with other people, about introducing new elements. There's a lot of aspects around Yu-Gi-Oh that make it fun. But in terms of actually the reason why people play the game, people play Yu-Gi-Oh because playing with the cards is fun. That's what most of this video boils down to. Now, Yu-Gi-Oh is a really, really big game, which is why making one overarching tutorial to talk about the entire thing is really difficult to do. This video here, How to Play Yu-Gi-Oh in 3 minutes, made by another popular creator, Simo here, another one of my favorites, is very, very big and is very easy to understand as it simply goes through all the basic elements of Yu-Gi-Oh, like special summoning monsters from the extra deck. And videos like this I think are great because they impart a lot of important knowledge that you are absolutely going to have to know to start playing Yu-Gi-Oh. Yu-Gi-Oh is a really, really old game, meaning that if you are not only starting the game or starting with some previous knowledge from a previous format, having a quick video to bring you up to speed in terms of what the summoning mechanics are currently present in the game is really important. The amount of things to learn just in terms of summoning monsters onto your side of the field is gargantuan. They have to teach you about normal summons, they have to teach you about normal monsters, they have to teach you about special summons and tribute summons and having monsters with effects on them. They have to teach you about fusion monsters which are present in your fusion deck, which is now called the extra deck because there's other extra deck monsters that are present in it. They have to teach you about ritual monsters, they have to teach you about synchro monsters, they have to teach you about XYZ monsters, they have to teach you about pendulum monsters, and they also have to teach you about link monsters, also that way you can just get a very basic understanding of what you are looking at if your opponent plays down any monster of any of these types. Most of these videos also take this time to mention the spell and trap cards and also the different board positions where you can play down spell and trap cards such as Change of Heart here or Mirror Force, how the ways that different spell cards interact on your turn and on your opponent's turns, and how trap cards can only be used on your opponent's turn and cannot be flipped up right away on your turn. And here's where one of the main pitfalls that almost all of the Yu-Gi-Oh tutorials falls into comes up, which is the different levels of importance in terms of all of the different card types. Because all of these mechanics are communicated as equal as you want to get through as many of them as possible so that you can get down all of the information that is present in Yu-Gi-Oh as quickly as you can, it is really hard for you as a new player to intuit which of these mechanics are going to be present in every single one of your games and which of these mechanics are something you'll only see once in a blue moon. Just for example here, many of the videos that are tutorials for Yu-Gi-Oh will talk about flip monsters and effect monsters that have quick effects that you can activate from the hand. As a new player, it is really hard for you to differentiate without any baseline of anything which one of these monsters you are going to be seeing more often in the game. Thanks to the fact that many of Yu-Gi-Oh's mechanics have massively different impacts on the game. For example, quick effect monsters in the hand are basically seen in almost every single match of modern Yu-Gi-Oh that is played, whereas flip monsters are extremely niche and will almost never be seen. It is really, really hard when you're a new player that is going in after just watching the tutorial to understand which of the parts of the tutorial are really important to keep in mind for when they're playing the game, and which of them can be almost completely discarded except for niche scenarios. Yu-Gi-Oh! Overall as a game that has been around for so long is absolutely full of fluff and has done almost nothing to chip away at the massive amount of knowledge that may be present in a single game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Not to say this is a bad thing, there are plenty of games that are full of a ton of complex mechanics that help add to the complexity of the game. However, most games like Magic the Gathering have done special things to set these things aside for new players when they are trying to understand the game on a fundamental level. Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic are both full of tons of mechanics that you may only see one match in 100 or even less than that, and you'll have to have an understanding of what the mechanic is when it comes up. However, Magic has done a lot of things like making these aspects less playable, adding in set rotation, and making it so that way many mechanics are packaged together, meaning they all rotate out at the same time, to make it a lot easier for a new player to only have to remember really crucial mechanics. If you look at Tevel here, this is a really, really good example of a card that shows what different aspects of Magic's cards need to be remembered and which ones don't. Things like flying and lifelink are something that almost all new players will almost immediately learn after playing through the tutorial, and therefore do not have to have reminder text placed on them so you can have an understanding. However, because of the mechanic Delve being very infrequently played and not seen except at the very, very high levels of powerful formats, the reminder text is added onto it so that way new players will not have to guess as to what the mechanic Delve actually does. This is made even worse in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because there is basically no downtime in Yu-Gi-Oh! Given to you to think about what you want to do. Almost all the games end in a very small amount of turns, and almost all of the time you are performing actions during those turns, which is a lot of fun for players who understand the game, but is extremely difficult for players who do not understand the game. Thanks to the fact that even the most basic of Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards used to start off combos in Yu-Gi-Oh! Have massive walls of text on them that may require multiple readings, it is very, very difficult for a new player to get a grasp on what basically any card does in the very early games of Yu-Gi-Oh! This means that it is really, really hard for you to learn anything during a game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Meaning that you have to basically learn all of the mechanics up front before you actually go in to play an actual game of Yu-Gi-Oh! This is further compounded by the fact that there were many archetypes that you may not have encountered or played against that your opponent could be playing that therefore ask you the question, hey, do you understand how flip monsters work even though they haven't really been relevant for a long time? I'm playing a gimmicky Mimikul deck that you may not understand and has to react with flip cards that go to your side of the field and you have to understand the way that those kind of cards work in this deck. Ritual monsters are a great example of this. They have been relatively weak throughout almost all of Yu-Gi-Oh's lifetime, meaning that if you were a new player, you wouldn't have to add this one thing to your mental stack. Understanding a ritual monster wasn't that important, because you were very unlikely to run into it. But because of the fact that Yu-Gi-Oh keeps growing and growing, gaining new mechanics and reintroducing old ones, ritual monsters are now something that every single player will be forced to have an understanding of and how to play against. Many people who play Yu-Gi-Oh have just told me this. It'll become a lot simpler if you just play a few games to try to get an understanding for it. Maybe we can't really explain everything to you up front because there's simply too much information to be front-loaded in a game of Yu-Gi-Oh. Well, if you just play a few games, get a basic understanding of how your decks work, slowly you will gain an understanding of how every deck works. First off, this is just not functional as a tutorial. Almost every single game in the world, if you just play it enough, you'll eventually gain an understanding of how it works just by reading the cards over and over again, like if you were doing a test. But that is really not what you want to do if you are making a tutorial for how to get people into your game. This also works a lot better for games that are really easy to understand. In a game like Magic, most of the powerful cards have 1 to 2 abilities and a basic amount of stats and a cost. There's really not that much on the card for you to read to understand, even at the highest levels of play. This can also be solved by making the game really casual. If you're playing a game where you're not trying to win or actively working against a clock or an opponent, it'll be a lot easier if your opponent plays down a card with a ton of text on it for you to just ask, hey, what does that do? And then because you're playing in a cooperative environment, there is no reason for your opponent to lie or take advantage of you or kind of trick you in terms of what their card actually does. Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't have either of these. Almost all of the Yu-Gi-Oh formats are 1v1, meaning it is actively in your opponent's advantage if you don't understand the cards that they use, because then they can use them in ways that you don't understand or can take advantage of your lack of knowledge. That's a lot of where the skill of Yu-Gi-Oh comes from, taking advantage of knowledge that you have that your opponent lacks. Not to mention that you're going to read absolutely an astounding number of words more if you are new to Yu-Gi-Oh than if you are new to almost any other card game on the market. Even the basic cards that are present in Yu-Gi-Oh's combos have a large wall of text that you may have to read multiple times to get an understanding of what the card does, not only while it's in play, but when it's in your opponent's hand or in the graveyard or being used for something like a synchro summon. As a new player, if you're going and entering a tournament for the first time, there are almost no safety nets there for you to be able to understand how to play the game on a fundamental level, other than just simply asking your opponent to explain every card they play, and then you having an understanding of what that actually means in the game from what you've seen from the very, very limited experience you have playing the game. A lot of these problems can be traced back to the fact that Yu-Gi-Oh! Only has one main win to play, which is just 1v1 against your opponent in the most common standard format. There are technically other versions of this format that are present in Yu-Gi-Oh!, but these are more as a fact of the fact that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has to have these formats rather than they want to. The three different formats are the TCG, the OCG, and Master Duel, which all have different ban lists and different versions of cards which are legal in the game. This is more because of the fact that cards are released at a different time in Japan than they do in America, and it takes an amount of time for Yu-Gi-Oh! Developers to add the cards into Master Duel, meaning that it's more of a forced version from Konami rather than a choice by them specifically. MBT's video actually illustrates a really important point about the history of Yu-Gi-Oh!, talking about both Master Duel and Duel Links, two different versions of Yu-Gi-Oh! Which can be played on your phone or online, a different version of Yu-Gi-Oh! That is completely separate from the regular game that lots of people got into because of the fact that it is associated with Yu-Gi-Oh! Both of these games provide something that is really, really important when you're introducing a new player into your game, and that's by providing a very much less hostile environment for someone to get into your game. It can be extremely intimidating to go down to a local game store, sit amongst a bunch of people you've literally never talked to before, and then just hope that you can ask any of them, hey, how does this work? How do you play this card? How does this mechanic work? A lot of them may not be willing to help you, or it may just be scary for you as a stranger to walk up to random other strangers and hope for them to help you. This is why it is so important to have single-player ways to play the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Like Duel Links or Master Duel. It makes it way, way less intimidating for a new player to get into your game if they can play it for themselves for a bit to understand not only if it is for them, but if they want to join the community. Making the game more accessible for players not only makes it easier for new players to start playing the game and get an understanding of how the game is played, but also makes it way, way less intimidating for you to go out completely on your own and try to find a way to play this game by yourself. I mean, hell, Magic in 2019 released Duels of the Planeswalkers for consoles and for PC, giving you an easy way for you to learn how to play Magic the Gathering all the way back in 2009 on the easiest way you could if you had an Xbox or a PlayStation. This is why having these cheap or free versions of the game is so important. It's really hard to recommend a game to someone if you not only need an entire teacher there to basically instruct you on how to play the game on a fundamental level, but you also need to shell out a significant amount of money before you even understand how to play the game. It's a really, really high barrier of entry for almost every single player trying to get into Yu-Gi-Oh! For the first time. A lot of these issues do arise from the fact that it is only one main playable format that is present in Yu-Gi-Oh!, meaning that everyone has to learn the same way for the first time if you want to play in any Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournament, and you can see a lot of this reflected in the way that the community treats the standard format. Thanks to the fact that there is very little diversity in terms of what is actually playable in the modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Format, having to play against multiple of the same decks over and over again, very powerful decks from the new archetypes that are released until new archetypes come out to replace those old ones from the previous packs, it is very, very common for Yu-Gi-Oh! Content creators and players to build community versions of different formats so that way they can play something separate from the main game. MBT, for example, as we saw before, has this time machine format he's been playing with his friends, where they go back in time and play older versions of different decks which were only present in certain years, 2008 for example, giving you a much different experience from the modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Of today. Simo takes the modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Of today and gives it a different spin, having a masochist series where he's only allowed to play with a very limited amount of cards and only gives himself new cards after he wins, making it a very, very different feeling experience where you are more often expected to lose a game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Than you are to win when climbing on the ladder. Farfa, another popular creator, has a draft tournament here where you do a different version of drafting, which is something that is very present in Magic as a common way to play the game, however, is completely foreign to a Yu-Gi-Oh! Player, meaning that if you want to do some sort of draft, you have to implement it yourself amongst friends without any outside assistance from Konami. Now, I will mention, while all of these do seem like much more fun ways to play the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Than actually playing the modern format, in my opinion, it is not completely impossible for you to come up with a way to play the modern game on YouTube and have success or a good time. Many popular YouTube channels like Team Samurai X, Team APS, or Joshua Schmidt all make content that is not only talking about the way the modern card game is played, but actually uploading versions of themselves playing the modern card game with different decks and different ways of playing the game. But even all of these channels feel a chafing underneath these restrictions, a need for more. They all post different videos talking about things like ban lists or different versions of the game such as the Genesis format. They all feel a need to have other versions of the content just because the basic card game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is too small for a single content creator to focus on. Now, a lot of you may look at this and say, hey, you're just putting your faith as a player in the community to make different formats for you to play and different things that are fun. Is that such a bad thing? And I would say no, it's definitely not a bad thing. In fact, it's an incredible thing to have in your community, putting themselves together to make new formats and new ways to play the game. If there's anything that I want you to take away from MBT's How to Play video, it's not actually how to play Yu-Gi-Oh, but how incredible of a Yu-Gi-Oh community has been formed over all of these years of playing the card game. My favorite example of this is definitely Jeff Leonard, a person who started playing Yu-Gi-Oh with his kid and wanted to have an understanding of how to play Yu-Gi-Oh together with his son, who plays in many tournaments and is always a pleasure to see doing well. The most surprising thing is that Jeff Leonard plays Mystic Mind and Exodia the Forbidden One, extremely toxic strategies focused on stopping your opponent from being able to play at all by either winning the game as immediately early as possible with the effect of Exodia or locking them out completely with Mystic Mind. The fact that this guy is still loved in the community is a really, really good sign for Yu-Gi-Oh, as they show that the person playing the game is much more important than the deck they are playing. All of this stuff is great and a good reason to get into Yu-Gi-Oh, but it shouldn't be mandatory. Even if I do think that you can put faith into the Yu-Gi-Oh community, it shouldn't be absolutely mandatory if you want to learn how to play the game that you trust the community to show you a good time. Obviously, it's a good sign, but the problem is that depending on where you are playing Yu-Gi-Oh can make it have a vastly different experience for you. If your local Yu-Gi-Oh community is really hostile towards you or hostile towards new players, there's almost nothing you can do in terms of playing the game other than literally move your location to a different store or a different country or a different city. This is part of the reason I think Duel Links and Master Duels were such big steps in the right direction for Yu-Gi-Oh! They give you a single player way to play the game and gain an understanding of Yu-Gi-Oh! Meaning that even if your local community is hostile towards Yu-Gi-Oh! As a game or towards you as a player, you can still find a way to play the game on your own terms and have a good time. Hell, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community itself has for years been making their own versions of these, such as Edo Pro and Dueling Book, which allow you to play Yu-Gi-Oh! As the modern game is played by yourself, just online against random opponents. All these ways, Master Duel, Duel Links, Edo Pro, Dueling Book, I think they're all great ways to start playing Yu-Gi-Oh! But the problem is they all don't feature a tutorial, a basic way to get you into the game, meaning that if you get into one of these, it is more than likely that somebody else introduced you to the game rather than the game bringing you in on its own terms. At this point, it's pretty obvious that Konami is much less than helpful in terms of bringing new players into the game. The only tutorial that you can currently find from Konami to actually teach you how to play the game is the one that is present in Master Duel, which is woefully inaccurate in terms of not only how the game is played, but what you're going to need to know to be able to play the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! This combined with the fact that Yu-Gi-Oh! Consistently changes the rules, meaning that if you even learned the game as little as 5 years ago, the rules are completely different from the way you used to play the game, makes it very, very hard for players to get into the game, even if you already knew how to play the game maybe 5 or 10 years ago. This stacks on top of the fact that they never let anything go from those 5, 10, 20 years ago of Yu-Gi-Oh's gameplay. Thanks to the fact that Yu-Gi-Oh has no form of set rotation or any way to remove previous mechanics from Yu-Gi-Oh, things like counter traps still remain present in the game even to this day, even though they were only really relevant very, very long ago and see much, much less play than they would back in the day when Solemn Judgment was one of the best cards in the game. Things like tuners, for example, need to be explained to literally every single player, just because even if you don't have any synchrons in your deck and don't have any intention of using any synchro monsters at all, if your opponent plays a tuner monster, they will need to explain to you how tuners work if they plan on making any synchro summoning in their deck. Thanks to the fact that there's already so many mechanics and Yu-Gi-Oh is very obviously not intent on cutting almost anything from the previous 20 years, Yu-Gi-Oh will never ever get simpler and will only ever get more difficult for new players to get into. This is a lot of the reason why Yu-Gi-Oh tutorials are getting more and more bloated over time. While it would be pretty easy to make a relatively simple tutorial for Yu-Gi-Oh with very, very few mechanics in it, because of the fact that every single mechanic has to stack on top of every other mechanic, almost everything needs to be explained. As much as Yu-Gi-Oh wants to remove Pendulum from the game, they simply can't because they have made it a pact with themselves to never ever remove any element from the modern game.
And that sucks, because I really do want to recommend Yu-Gi-Oh!
In my opinion, out of all of the major card games, Yu-Gi-Oh has probably the coolest anime and coolest card aesthetic out of any of the games on the market. There's a reason things like Exodia, things like Dark Magician, and things like Blue Eyes White Dragon still resonate even today, and people still know about them even as Yu-Gi-Oh has continued on and transformed vastly from the very early years of the game. But if you're a fan of other card games, I find it really difficult to recommend Yu-Gi-Oh to you if you're a fan of almost any other card game on the market. There is simply no other game that has at all similar mechanics to the way Yu-Gi-Oh is played in its modern format, and explaining it to a person was something that would take so much time that is often not worth their time for me to do it, meaning that they would have to find somebody else who's willing to sit down for multiple hours to teach someone how to play the game. This gets even worse if you're an old fan of Yu-Gi-Oh! Having players that used to play in the games where Gemini Elf was the best card in the game and having to bring them all the way up to understanding the way that Link monsters work is a massive multi-year walking process where you have to go through every single mechanic that Yu-Gi-Oh has had implemented in over 20 odd years. Not to mention the fact that even if you started on later in this process, maybe you're familiar with synchros, XYZs, maybe you're familiar with pendulum monsters, you still need to not only re-explain what all the newer monsters were and how the old monsters have changed over time, such as rituals or fusion monsters not needing polymerization, but then you also need to explain all of the different rule changes that have happened to the board and the game as a whole. I think it's pretty needless to say, but if you need a multi-day tutorial to teach a person how to even begin playing your game, even if they have already played that exact same game many years ago, there is definitely something that has gone wrong with all of the tutorials present in the game. And this is why I think this MBT video disappointed me so much. We really need a real tutorial. A true how to play Yu-Gi-Oh! That doesn't just explain how the game got to where it is and what the different basic mechanics of the game are, but one that generally understands and explains to you as a player what you are going to need to do if you want to go play Yu-Gi-Oh! Tomorrow at your LGS. I'm sick and tired of looking at different tutorial videos where they just show you how to normal summon Celtic Guardian as the introduction to how normal summoning works, as that is something that you will simply never be doing in a modern game of Yu-Gi-Oh! We need a way to explain the modern game to new players so that way they can walk into Yu-Gi-Oh! And have a good expectation of what their first game is actually going to look like. Start off by talking about hand traps and giving a player an introduction to how hand traps work and how important it is if you are going first versus going second in a game of Yu-Gi-Oh! This will help them have a more prepared experience for when they go into that first game and may have a game where they play literally no cards. Have a guide starting off with modern combo starter card that you will be seeing from game after game. Almost every archetype has a card that is played as a 3 of that you will commonly play down to start by searching your deck, getting your combo starters, and getting into your main deck engine. This is something that is really important to understand if you are starting out in Yu-Gi-Oh! So you can understand even what you are looking at when you are starting a game. Explain not only the massive wall of text that is present on almost every single card, but also dumbing it down in a way where even if you don't understand what all of the card means, you can get a general gist of what the card does by just skimming it over the first time and reading, oh, when this card is normal summoned, search your deck for a blah. And also explain the most core element that is present in Yu-Gi-Oh! That I see talked about way too infrequently, which is archetypes. A way to explain what different archetypes do and focus on so that way you can differently segment different ways of summoning cards, such as fusion summoning, ritual summoning, synchro summoning. If you know what different decks are capable or intend to do different versions of different summoning elements, it can be a lot easier for you as a player to segment which different parts of the game you need to be paying attention to in any game. If you're playing against Dragotail, you're going to need to worry a bit about fusion summoning. If you're playing against Mitsurugi, you'll have to worry about rituals, etc. By actually explaining what may happen when you go into a modern game of Yu-Gi-Oh! With a modernly prepared deck, you can get a pretty basic understanding of cards and play patterns that you will be seeing over and over again, making it much, much easier for a new player to gain a basic understanding of what is going on in a game just at a glance. Of course, that's just hopes from me, as most of the tutorials nowadays don't really have anything of that ilk. If you would like to see me make one, let me know down in the comments below. Remember to like and subscribe while you're down there, and also let me know if I missed out on any tutorials that do a better job explaining than the ones that I have seen on my homepage for Yu-Gi-Oh! I spent a lot of time in this video looking around, seeing if I could find any tutorial that I deemed adequate in terms of teaching players how to start playing the game, and simply none of them stood up to snuff. If you want me to try to make that video, let me know down in the comments below. I've also started a Patreon. I had it for a while. However, I haven't shouted it out on my main channel as I simply didn't have any patrons. So if you want to support me, you can head over to Patreon and subscribe. Just giving me a few dollars every month will help a lot in terms of me making these videos more consistently. For now, I would just like to thank Captain Pancake for helping make this video possible. And if you have any more recommendations for future videos or future things that we'd like to receive as Patreon benefits, you can let me know in the comments on Patreon. Like I said earlier, remember to subscribe. A large portion of my audience isn't actually subscribed to me as they just watch my videos on the side or while they're asleep. So if you can leave subscribe, it would really help my channel boost in the YouTube algorithm a lot. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.